Black box, number 1. Behind the curtain. What is the curtain, and what is it covering? Did man evolve in a linear evolution or in quantum steps? If not via the doctrine of uniformity, including Darwinian evolution, then what evidence is there to the contrary? To answer this question, one needs to look at a full body of archaeological, anthropological, paleontological, geological, astronomical, mythical, and religious evidence. Much of this work has been well covered by researchers in years past, and those sources will be noted at another time. Today we will discuss the oddity of lack of language in ancient times, and for that we need to go back in time to the beginning of writing. How, in fact, did mankind communicate prior to written language? If you believe that mankind evolved in a linear evolutionary fashion, then you probably believe that we have progressed since the advent of writing. Your interpretation of history and your definition of progress will dictate whether you think we have or not. Progress in this regard may best be considered not as progress in the conventional sense of the advent of scientific learning, which did advance or perhaps was relearned, but in the overall progress of man's spirit and relationship with his spirit, which moved from the intuitive to the internal mind. This internalization allowed considered thought and the rational mind required for science. The allowance for rational thought in turn diminished the intuitive or sympathetic relationship his mind had with the world some consider as the spirit world, but includes in this sense any communication received by the mind, whatever it implied. This would include communication with angels and demons as well as premonitions. However, if you believe that there is evidence of higher human intelligence and progress prior to the advent of writing, such as would be derived or implied from myths, legends, and archaeological evidence, and that writing is a necessary component of such advancement, then you might ask why there was no evidence of writing or language associated with it. Prior to our recent knowledge of writing as we find it in our historical record, there is no record of writing associated with the more ancient civilizations. However, there is evidence of advances which are not explained by current mainstream narratives. Whether this advancement preceded the end of the last ice age, which evidently ended catastrophically, is an open question. There exists then this question: were these advances performed without language, or were they performed prior to the end of the last ice age by a civilization, the remnants of which are no longer visible to us? A partial answer to this is that evidence exists of use of communication, such as what we today call telepathic or mind-to-mind. The usage of symbols or hieroglyphs to impart a deeper and more detailed meaning imply a process that is not now believed possible. The symbols would, to the ancient mind, conjure up a comprehensive image of what the symbol represented. The beetle in ancient Egypt, for example. It is difficult at first to think of achieving high technology with symbols, but we should not be constrained to think of what might be achievable in such a way based on how our minds currently work, or put another way, apply our own scientific method to the problem. If the evidence points toward a non-language based set of communication skills that would allow high levels of technical and social development, then a thesis should be put forth to match the data. It may later be proven correct or not. However, if our current thesis that language and linear progress are a prerequisite for development, and yet there is evidence of development without those, then the thesis must be altered, not the data, or in this case, the belief in what we think the data shows. Following on, if we accept that prior civilizations achieved high levels of advancement without language as we know it, why was it abandoned? It has been hypothesized that humankind is on a progression from the internalized mind to the rational, material mind. This progression in this regard constitutes in the near term a transition from intuitive, or what some call the right brain, to material, or what some call left brain centered existence. While in one mode, mankind learns certain lessons, while in the other, mankind learns other types of lessons. This might seem in conflict with the concept of catastrophism. Whether or how this progression relates to the cycles of Earth catastrophe cycles is uncertain, but the case for catastrophism has been well established. Consider the works of Hapgood, White, Snelling, Thomas, Velikovsky, and others. Consider now the differences in how this challenges mankind. In the first case, or right brain side, we have a unique ability to connect with one another and in theory to the universal cosmic knowledge base. Mankind would be able to directly relate to universal knowledge as well as entities that are not incarnated, such as the generic world of spirits and angels. This communication must be filtered through humanity and used by humanity, and as such can be contaminated by humanity, but there is a very broad spectrum of possibilities. Prior to internalization and individual thought, mankind would not consider this communication with a rational lens. In the second case, we do not have this special connection to universal knowledge or one another, as it is cut off to us by rational thought. However, in the second case, we look internally and develop our own unique way of thinking within the confines of our close-in mental environment. We developed a scientific method which at a point in time supplants our belief in connection with the cosmic knowledge available prior. We develop internal dialogue and focus what comes in on our five senses as recorded in our left brain environment. Now we need and rely on unwritten language. In the first case, could ancient megalithic structures and the apparent advanced knowledge of astronomy develop without language? Given the evidence that this knowledge existed and language did not, we are left with two suppositions. The first is that yes, it was possible to have advanced knowledge without language. The second case is that advancement existed prior to the age of symbols, perhaps destroyed catastrophically, and the only evidence we have left is megalithic structures, legend, and myth. And it is worth noting again that advancement regarding megalithic structures may imply an ability to manipulate natural materials that we do not have, yet may not imply advanced electronics, for instance. A different kind of advancement for a different kind of man. It has been written that the first lie a human ever told was in the year 1643. If you accept that telepathy was the mode of communication in ancient times, then you might have wondered how this could work in today's world. What if I did not want someone to know what I am thinking? Could I hold a lie in my mind? Could I harbor hate? Have you ever considered the fate of the millions of people burned at the stake in the Inquisition? Have you wondered why, upon examination, they did not just lie and say, I relinquish my heretical beliefs to save themselves? Certainly some must have been able to use this recourse. There is a story of a man considered a heretic that was chased for 5 years throughout Europe. When they caught him, he said he would relinquish all of his heretical beliefs, save for one, which he would not. He burned at the stake. Here then we begin to see the first definition of the curtain. In transitioning from telepathic communication to internal dialogue, writing, and deliberate thinking, we have drawn a curtain in our minds, sectioning off the intuitive and interactive in exchange for the ability to analyze the material. As noted above, it is not clear whether this reflects a linear progression of man or whether mankind is reestablished periodically via catastrophism. Perhaps now is the time to draw the curtain back, for us to go forward by reverting back to our native ability to communicate with the cosmos. Perhaps the answers will manifest. Do you believe this? First, look in your own mind. Have you ever had a premonition? I can give you my own example. When I was young, I could read minds on occasion. I could not dictate the occasions, but when they came, they were perfectly clear, word for word, understanding of what was in my associate's mind. One day, when I was a young teen, it was happening in conversation with a friend. At that moment, I told myself this was an unfair advantage to go through life with, and from that moment until today, it has been shut off. But the knowledge that this ability exists within us still remains. Look for your own examples. Recognize and see. Once you see, consider. We are now well along the path of transitioning from intuitive, idealistic life to internalized scientific thought. We have struggled. We have given over ourselves to religious and governmental authority. Forces considered evil have manifested themselves through oppression, torture, and mass murder. We are now in another transitory period. We have entered the next age as noted by ancient and recent prophecy, as well as astrological prediction. We are now challenged with incorporating the newly uncovered scientific thought with the great unknown, which is knowable, but from which we have largely been cut off. To be successful, we must now revert back to the internalized communication with cosmic knowledge. We must draw back the curtain. But when we see again with our intuitive mind, we will this time be able to rationalize and consider what we gather in. But we must also join forces together to overcome the negative or evil, if you prefer. Those forces which exist, which prefer to use humanity to their own ends. Tesla said that his brain was only a receiver. There are many such similar statements made by famous innovators. Our planet and humankind within us are undergoing dramatic changes. The answer of the what, where, when, and why lies within each of us. Remembering that we have the natural ability to look within us is the first step toward understanding. Understanding may constitute survival. The power of the mind, imagination, and love are now what mankind must put forth, individual by individual. Whether cosmically or self-inflicted, we are likely at the threshold of major catastrophic change. Joining the old with the new through meditation and practice are the required tools of mankind. I'll conclude with this quote from Jonathan Black's The Secret History of the World. The quote is this: Pythagoras' philosophy, therefore, begins with the process of translating the primordial vision, the picture consciousness of ancient humanity, into abstract conceptual terms.